everyone. Welcome to UX Design and Wine, where I sit down with UX designers and product leaders over a glass of wine or two, and we chat all things UX and how they got into the industry and their advice as product professionals in the tech world. So they share the good, the bad, the ugly. And today I'm so happy to have the tech entrepreneur and creative Brian Hough sharing a glass of wine with me. He's actually a software engineer, but he began as a UX designer. So I'm excited to chat with him about that transition, how he became a self-taught software engineer, now working for some huge companies. And also he's an AWS Community Builder. So he's got a really impressive transition. So I'm excited to chat with him. And he creates content that's really educational for people trying to get into development and technology. He runs his own YouTube channel and podcast called Tech Stack Playbook. So he's a really awesome guy, and I'm excited to sit down with him. So let's get started. Well, Brian, thank you so much for chatting with me today and sharing a glass of wine. Cheers.
Totally. Cheers. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, so to start, I'm really curious, how do you describe yourself? Because you're more than just like a software engineer working with blockchain and cloud, but you also do UX design and marketing and branding and hackathons, etc. So how do you define what you do?
That's a great question. I feel like I constantly am trying to figure out how do I, identify as someone in tech, because there's so many different areas. And really how I got into tech was through the lens of design. So as someone who was non-technical coming into this space, I found UX design as a way to bring the creativity that I was doing with Photoshop into a way that could apply to developers. And then it was sort of like that was the need at the time. And then I did design. And then the design sort of was, you can't, build anything yet. So then I learned front end. And then, the front end can't do anything unless you do a back end. So then I've sort of had to re-evolve my identity in tech as I found that there's needs. So I've kind of been going, with the market and what teams that I'm on need. So I would definitely say that I'm a builder. That's kind of like, I'd say like my first ethos as an identity. And I'm definitely a creator. So that stems into content, product, design. But I definitely feel like I identify first as a builder and then second as a creator.
Very cool. I like that, builder. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the ways that people get into UX and just tech in general are so varied. So it's always fascinating, to hear.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
I guess, did you always know that you wanted to go into more of the entrepreneurial side of technology as opposed to working, for in a corporate capacity, full-time for a company?
Yeah, great question. So I got really my background was doing public relations. So working for a really big corporate public relations agency gave me a lot of, I'd say, inspiration for what to build. Like when Google AutoML came out, I was actually tracking the media around that for the agency that I was interning for at the time, and that really inspired me because I remember going back to campus and like researching like how to do AI. And then I found out that like you could do it from your own computer. So that really inspired me to think like, okay, like I don't necessarily know if and this was like back in college, like I don't necessarily know if I identify as an entrepreneur, but I want to be kind of like an explorer. Like I want to learn these things and then see what happens, right? Because the worst is you learn something new. Best case is maybe that's something you end up doing in life. So that's kind of where I was working sort of within public relations or social media for big global tech companies, especially Gardner award-winning tech companies. So they're sort of at the intersection of like cloud computing, data networks, AI, machine learning. All that stuff was really cool. Blockchain was through the lens of venture capital. So I was working for a VC firm after I graduated college. And that was when I like went full on down the tech rabbit hole. I kind of was like always eyeing these things, but I think working for a big company, you have the benefit of having a lot of connections and a lot of experience, ways that you can sort of connect with different people, different thought leaders, learn how they think. And then that sort of inspired me to then want to really go down further into tech. So yeah. I really enjoyed that. But I do think that like working for a big tech company gives you a lot of benefits and being exposed to that global tech ecosystem. Because when you're like kind of doing like solopreneur, it can be really hard to like make connections and scale. But if you partner or like work under other large companies, you can learn at a much faster rate, I think. And then you can always go and do your own thing later. But definitely working. big
I
companies.
totally agree. I was going to ask if you kind of recommend, maybe there are others out there watching who want to get into a little bit more of an entrepreneurial space in tech. Do you recommend that they start first in a corporate setting for a tech company? We learn the ropes, get exposure, network before making that leap?
That is a good question. I think that it depends. I think there are some people that, and I'm the same way. So like I am a self-taught software engineer, so I've had to kind of find and learn and teach myself as I've gone. And for me, that's worked. I've been able to, from what other people have told me, I've been able to learn very quickly. And that's sort of, I think, what can help me. So if you're somebody that is really self-motivated and self-driven, and you can learn really fast, and you can adapt really well, then maybe working for a company might slow you down. I think if you are like really motivated and driven, then you can definitely do it on your own. It's just when you have benefits of partnering with other larger people, like other fish in the ecosystem, it can just help you scale in different ways. But I don't think that there's sort of a one size fits all. I've definitely seen people that no one knew who they were. They built a startup, they ended up getting funding, and then they become a thought leader, and then it's like, well, wait, I didn't know you like a couple of years ago, and now you're like a big fish, right? It's totally possible. I just have also seen it where people become big fish in, a FANG company, or I guess it would be a MANG company because of Meta, but not Facebook, but they work for like a FANG company, right? And then they pivot, they do their own solo thing, like they've built a following, people know who they are, and then they're doing their thing on their own. So it totally depends. The answer to your question is like, there's not one size fits all. I think I've seen it on both sides. It just, I think knowing yourself is the best way to do that, because let's say that you maybe like aren't, as like personally motivated, like then you might want to build out a team of people that can motivate you, or like build accountability. So I think it's just knowing yourself and knowing how you work best and scaling from there.
Yeah, totally agree. That's fascinating that you're self-taught. That's amazing. How did you do that? Was it just a bunch of Googling, YouTube videos, online courses, that type of thing?
That is a good question. So I'd say I didn't really like plan to become a developer, to be honest. I remembered when, and this is sort of, I'd say what sort of kickstarted the development for me. So it was a kind of a long time coming, but it wasn't like one time where I'm like, I will become a developer. That's not how it started. I remembered, so my university had an accelerator, and I met up with a grad student at a networking event, and she was like, "Oh, like, I love to like have you join my startup." And I'm thinking like, "What's a startup?" Like I was also also kind of like pre-graduating college, so I was much younger, and I was sort of thinking like, "Oh, like what's a startup? That could be kind of cool." So we had this idea for a platform, but neither one of us knew how to code, and we were like building, and I'll always remember that I had like the best design, I had a really cool pitch deck for us, and everything was really cool, but we always lacked the thing, which was the product. Yeah. So that was really exactly. And that's what really like motivated me to be like, okay, that's the thing that I need to do Y. Like get X, get Y, and then get Z. I needed the X, which was like the coding component. So that was kind of like when I graduated, and then when I started working for some companies, like I was also like teaching myself coding in the background, and I got really like hooked into it in like evenings and weekends when I started like actually building like my first few very prototypical applications. But then once I learned like that you could run code on your own, that inspired me to be like, okay, I want to take this stuff way more seriously. And then definitely over the pandemic, we just had like an abundance of free time, because you don't have to commute. You're already at home, you're already working virtually, if you had that option. But for me, like I was working remote, so I didn't have to travel anywhere. And then I had that benefit of just having hours to spend, and tried to put that to good use. So that's what I ended up teaching myself how to code. But it wasn't like I learned this in like a month, or I learned this in 6 months. Like this was over like a few years, but definitely in stages as I went along.
That's very cool. And just curious for maybe other designers who are in the UX design space, but kind of eyeing getting into development, what languages did you start with?
Oh yeah, okay, so speaking design, I would say the first language I learned, which is not really a language, but I learned Figma. And that was what really helped me understand components, because when you think about creating a module, like let's think about you have, and I always see this in apps, it looks kind of cool, but in the top right-hand corner, you'll have like your profile picture, and then there's a drop down. Then you have different menus. So when I started breaking those things down, obviously if you use Figma, you might think like, okay, build out a kind of a section or a component, and then, Control C, Control V, copy and paste it. and then like make the menu buttons down. That mindset really helped me think about React, because sort of the benefits of React or Next.js, they're JavaScript based frameworks. You build in components. So you could sort of make like a menu button, and then you could like repeat the menu button based upon however many items you want. So really like learning fundamentals of design helped me a lot to learn how to code in React, because then it was like, oh, okay, so there's this text, there's this image, there's this action, and then it leads to another page or something like that. So then I would use JavaScript to then like make that component, design it, maybe use some CSS to style it, and then, export it. But I would say for anyone that's in like design, like you're in such a great place if you want to step into development, because you already are in the mindset of what maybe you're sending to a developer or a product team. And then it's just, okay, learn the code that then can map it. So you're going to learn a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, a little bit of JavaScript. And then that's how you take like the design component into a development component.
Wow, that's really cool. I've never heard of kind of using Figma as that little bridge between, going from designer to developer. So I think that's really cool. And kind of along those lines, what best practices would you have for designers to make the developers that they're working with love them? Like how do they streamline that designer to developer handoff, and how do they make everyone on the team happy and make it as smooth as possible?
Yeah, I'm definitely very passionate about this. I think design is so important for development teams, because sometimes if you're like in a startup setting, you have to be the designer and the developer, which can be kind of stressful. So if you have an amazing designer, it just makes everything so much better. I think one of the things that any good design, especially UI UX, flows really strong is, can you talk and like explain the design? And what I mean by that is, let's say that you design a mock-up and and it's great and it looks really cool, but then you send it to a developer and the developer goes, okay, but how do I get from this to this? Mm-hmm. How do I get from that to that? I click on this button, what does this do? So in Figma, you can do prototypes, and those can be really helpful. But I do think just spending maybe like 5 to maybe 10, maybe 15 minutes going through the design with a developer is really helpful. So it's not necessarily a design skill as much a communication strategy. So when you go through a flow, and the developer will obviously have questions as you go along, like if you could like maybe do 5 to 15 minutes and then just screen record and talk over it, and maybe you're on the call with them and then you record it so you can send it to them afterwards. But being able to walk them through the design, not just like, hey, here it is, like handoff, it's more like, let me actually like explain this to you, because maybe you'll have some questions, and it saves everyone a lot of time, I think. But being able to communicate the design, I think is a skill that maybe is underrated, but very, very important.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like it's not necessarily widely talked about as being a core skill of a UX designer. Obviously, design is number one, but
exactly,
having the ability to explain your designs and explain the functionality and the intended behavior and the flows from the prototype is so important. Whether that's I like your idea of filming a video, screen recording and sending it to the developer. I've done that before as well. And then also another alternative is commenting with a lot of explanations in the Figma file, or even I've done it before if it's really kind of complex and a lot of description, even creating like a separate Google slide. And taking the designs there and really laying it out there, just so that there's something written and there for any time when the developer wants to have a question answered, that type of thing. So yeah, I think documenting and being able to communicate about your designs is really important.
Totally.
Cool. So going back to a little bit your day-to-day, right? What is it like creating content for Tech Stack Playbook, which is your YouTube channel and podcast, and also balancing that with being an AWS Community Builder?
Totally. So it's been really cool, I'd say. It wasn't necessarily, I would say, like the journey that I knew I was signing up for when I got into tech, but I definitely have been, at least since the pandemic, flexing between, again, being the builder and being the creator. Those were sort of like what we were just talking about. But I use often like the developer or like the builder kind of hat to then kind of code out the content I make. So one of the things that I was doing was like I was going to a lot of hackathons. I ended up getting work in Web3. So I was doing a lot of development, and then it ended up becoming more full stack development. So oftentimes, like when I was talking to people, whether those are like business leaders, maybe non-technical people, but still work in Web3, There's also a lot of builders that maybe, front end, back end, but they're looking to get started with smart contracts. That was really what fueled me to make the 3-hour Intro to Web3 Solidity course that I put on my YouTube channel. And that got a lot of buzz. And that was like really cool because I was taking a lot of the insights that I was gaining kind of as the builder on the job and then putting that into a course. And I feel like education is one of the best ways that you can bring adoption, because everyone in Web3 and in Web2 too, but it's like, how do I get people to use my tech, or how do I get people to, build on my blockchain or something like that, or, use my SDK. So like the best way is through education. So I've been obviously building, but then being able to then make content and courses. That's been a way that I've sort of liked being able to blend the educational hat that I really like with also the builder hat. So it's really fun when you can make content and then have people be like, oh, this was like my first course into this industry, and like seeing you, like you made it accessible for me. Like I love getting messages from that, and it's just fun to hear that on like Instagram or YouTube, and just knowing that the content you make actually can impact people's lives. I think that that's really cool. So of course you can like be heads down as a developer, but I do like that public education sharing element of being a creator too.
That's awesome. Yeah, it must be so rewarding to be able to, hear a developer down the road or any person in tech who watched your content, your courses, right?
Oh, totally.
And got a great job somewhere, or was able to produce or build. So that's really cool.
Oh, totally. Because as a self-taught developer, like I've benefited from a lot of those types of courses. So then being able to kind of pass it back, I often say that intro to Web3 course, it's pretty fundamental. I mean, if someone is building, smart contracts for a major layer 1 or layer 2, then like that might be a little bit too foundational for them. But for people that are just looking to get into the space, sometimes just having that bridge of here's everything that you need to know, like 0 to hero, how do you get started? Those courses are so important, because especially the space is getting so technical now. There's like people talking about, ZK proofs, like zero knowledge proofs and hashing and a whole bunch of different types of algorithms. So for someone that really just wants to get started, that might be really intimidating. So being able to say like, you'll get there, but here's a bridge to get to that point. I love that part of it.
No, absolutely. I mean, even from my end on the UX side, that's one of the reasons why I like creating UX content, is it can feel very overwhelming when you're wanting to get into that industry. So to be able to watch videos, which is definitely what I did as well, and see things broken down and kind of hear from a real life designer, I found helpful. So that's why I kind of wanted to contribute and create content as well. So cool.
Oh, totally. And your content is really great as well. Like I remember that's how I even like reached out and like found you, because I saw your content pull up as recommended on my feed, and I was like, oh, okay, short form content. Because short form content, it really can make a big splash, I think, for people. It makes like breaking stuff down the way that you do that. Like I really like your approach to education around UX too.
Awesome, appreciate it, thank you. So we've talked about kind of what the rewarding parts of it are in terms of what you do. What are some of the biggest challenges? Like what do you struggle with when you're creating the content or building in parallel with, educating at the same time? What are some of those challenges?
Definitely. Yeah, I'd say it's it can seem like it's not a lot of work, but then when you actually start making content, it actually can become quite a lot. My 3-hour intro to Web3 and Solidity development course, that took me about a month, maybe like a month and a week, but not a month and a week of full-time work. It's kind of time that I can spend like outside of work when I have free time. So that can be one of the downsides, I'd say, or the challenges is, time management around other things. So of course you have the laundry list of things that, you want to do, but like what are the things that you actually have to do to get the job done? So it's prioritizing, of course, like the work first, and then being able to find time to also make content. So it's like when you can be as motivated as you want to be, but sometimes just the time is not there. I remember like sometimes with some product sprints I was in, kind of around like September, October, that was when like it was really hard to find ways to like make content or do outside things, because sometimes you might be really heads down on work project. And I'm sure we can all relate to that of like, you're spending outside time trying to learn something to then implement that into work. And sometimes with work, it's specifically in the last, I'd say like 6 months, I've been mainly doing backend engineering. So I kind of started this time last year, I was just doing front end. So then to be switching to do backend is like something totally different. So I've been spending a lot of time to learn, how to use like GraphQL, backend, writing with scripts with Node.js, like a lot of those types of things. And when you're learning those things for work, that just takes precedent, and then the content is lower. So I sort of prioritize or made a compromise of maybe doing like short form content. Those can be kind of fun. And like, I remember like making one short form content on authentication, kind of as just like a joke, because I had to like do it was like multi-factor authentication methods for work. And I made like a TikTok about how like, if you delete all of the authentication methods, then there's no more bugs. And like, I remember like, I was actually on a call with one of my company's partners who does authentication, and like we hadn't met yet, but he looked up my TikTok and he said like, oh, that's funny because like that's literally like what we do at our company is like authentication stuff. So it's like, you know, yeah, it's just fun like when you make content. So you don't necessarily like, I think one of the challenges was like I have to make long form content because long-term content, you know, is king/queen, like that's what we want. But sometimes short form content could be just as effective, but like a fraction of the time. So it can be time consuming, but knowing that like you don't have to always do like 100 for everything. Like sometimes you can just do like 70 or 60, and that still is enough to fulfill the content, but also make impactful content as well. It's just you don't have to go the full 100 meters. Sometimes you just can go 60, and that's still okay.
That's great advice, because you always have a vision in your head of you want to get it to, you know, this perfect vision, but sometimes it's so time consuming or so difficult, you know, with other priorities. But even just small baby steps, right, it can be better than not getting to that final vision. So very cool. And now that you work with companies kind of big and small, and you work with other software engineers and other designers, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see some of these junior developers or junior designers making that may be kind of stopping them from reaching their goals?
That is a good question. You're asking the good questions today. I'd say one of the biggest things that, and I don't know if this is necessarily something that's holding somebody back, but this is definitely something that I found was holding me back when I first started coding. I was, and there's a phrase sort of in tech of like breaking code, or like you're just like your code breaks, so then you have to like break more code. There's also for anyone that's like in the Solana ecosystem as a developer, you might have heard of the term of like chewing glass. It's just making mistakes in building and then like iterating on that. And I think when I started, I was very shy. I shied away from, you know, doing things and causing errors or causing bugs because I wanted it to run completely every time. And you know, as you build more things, you realize that like, well, actually you need to find if there are errors, because that means that something is happening. It might not be the thing that you want to have happen, but you at least are going to be debugging it. But I was afraid of basically making errors or making mistakes. And then I've just found over the past kind of year and a half that like it's okay to make mistakes as long as you're sort of diagnosing those problems and then figuring out what the solution is. So I think that might be something that might be holding other people back, is like be afraid to make mistakes, be afraid to go make errors, especially if you're a designer, like, you know, go with a really bold vision. And then if it's too bold, you can always scale back. But I sort of feel like if you're too reserved in how you think about creativity, it can often be a lock over the potential of the potential project. So I just sort of feel like don't let, I don't know, sort of systems that are around you like feel like there are limits. Because especially like when you work amongst other teams, like people will tell you if something is off base, but chances are we get in our heads and we overthink a lot. So just sort of being free to build and create, and then make sure that it's on scope for what you want to do. Obviously, like don't go crazy, but thinking that like think of how whatever you can build, like try to go and build on that. And then if there's errors, if there's bugs, if there's mistakes, like you can always build off from that. But like getting started and not being afraid from taking that step forward, I think that's one of the biggest things that I think could probably be holding other people back, because I know that held me back. And now I'm totally down to like write scripts, write functions, and then have an error. I remember like there was one time I was trying to build a CI/CD pipeline. So basically taking code from the repo, the repository, and then push it through Git to GitHub, and then build through AWS. And I had to build something, I think it was like 48 times, because there was like TypeScript errors, there was version control errors, and those are things that you need the script to tell you. Like it'll build locally, but it won't build in production. So I had to debug like between like 40 to 50 times. And sometimes that's just what it takes. Like sometimes there isn't like an easy way out, but you can kind of just laugh at it and be like, okay, well now I know these 5 ways, these 10 ways, these 15 ways this doesn't work. Like what's the 20th? What's the 25th way? And then you just keep on building from that. But yeah, not getting intimidated either from big challenges, because oftentimes the solution is much less intimidating than what we thought it out to be in the beginning.
Definitely. I think that's such good advice, such a good point. I feel like a similar thing I think held me back at the beginning as well, just kind of trying to play it safe a little bit, or being kind of too worried to make sure I meet the requirements or hit the scope. And so now kind of a thing that I've started to do over the last several years is really make sure that I build in a little bit of kind of creative exploratory time at the beginning. So when I first have a task or a project or something I need to tackle, I kind of just let go of all of the voices in my head thinking, I've got to do it this way, and just kind of play some music, really get creative and allow myself to kind of just go crazy with different options. And I feel like doing that at the beginning allows me to really see what bold options look like, or this type of variation, and I get a lot more creative options out of myself by building that time in first before I start fine tuning it, paring it down, making sure it meets all requirements. So I think that's a really good point. I think that's something that I think, is human nature, to kind of be easily intimidated or a little bit scared to go for it at the beginning. And with time in your career, you kind of lose that fear and you can shake it off and you get better results in the end.
Oh, totally. I love the idea of having creative time built in. I don't think a lot of times we think about that. But that might be something that I might try to implement more into my own workflow, because we really seldom, usually creativity, I think, is an afterthought sometimes. And it's if you build it in, like, I could see where that really sets you up for success from the beginning, than having to think about, how do we backtrack, bring more creativity into a project we've already started. So that's a cool idea.
Awesome. So now that we're kind of nearing the end of 2022, something I always like to do every year is kind of reflect back and look at the design trends or the tech trends that were big in 2022, and kind of just think like which of those tech trends are going to be big in 2023, or do we feel like something else is going to come out and be the big new thing in 2023? So do you I don't know, do you have kind of a big tech trend in mind that you feel like is going to be really big in 23?
Yes, I definitely, I'll do a design and a tech trend that I'm really excited about. I think I don't know if you know about the whole like trend, at least in fintech it was really hot, but glassomorphism. So having like transparent, it's like having transparent elements in there and gradients. I think that those are going to be huge. I think that those are here to stay. I love adding a really slick gradient or a really slick glassomorphic design into an element, just because, especially with like pop-ups and modals, like when you can have like a pop-up and then it like glasses out things behind it and it looks really sleek. I think UI UX is going to be so important for any app. I just think that especially having mobile enabled applications are going to be huge, because oftentimes, like when we develop, it's easier to develop for a desktop than it is for mobile. And I think when we think about like Chrome, Brave, Safari, all the mobile apps we have on our phone for internet, a lot of apps actually can run not just in like the iOS app, but then also on the desktop, like on the computer, on the phone.
Yeah.
And I think that having mobile optimization is going to be huge, because people expect that now. I mean, definitely, especially when you like click on an email link and it maybe doesn't open up in the app, but it opens up to the web link, and then having it look exactly like the app. That's the tech trend that I would predict, is that making things very mobile enabled and mobile friendly, because of course you can drive people to then go and use the app if they have it on their phone. But sometimes like companies might prioritize just having a desktop only version, but it's mobile optimized. So that's a way to kind of skirt around needing to do iOS development, is if your app can function as if it was a mobile app, but in a browser. It's where I think it's going to be really important, at least going into the next couple of years ahead.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think especially in like B2B design, where it's a little bit behind, B2C apps. I think for quite a while, you've been able to kind of get away with prioritizing the web or desktop application and then making things kind of responsive, but not fully mobile responsive. And I think building that in from the beginning is going to continue to grow. I just think people's expectations, even for B2B apps, have just skyrocketed in terms of we expect it to be seamless, we expect it to be beautiful experience across devices, and also very consistent. So I think that's a good one.
Totally.
Awesome. And then looking at 2023, which trend do you want to die in 2023? Ooh. Which do you maybe not like, you want it to kind of go out?
That is a good question. I feel like I'm gonna have to think on this one a little bit, because like I feel like I've seen a lot of really great designs, but I feel like at least like this might be a little bit of a hot take, but it's like if there's like an error
I like hot
page,
takes.
it's like I feel like if there's like a website, right, and you have like a 404 error page where like page not found or something like that, I just feel like at least make it funny, at least make it like trendy. I feel like there's a lot of pages where it's like error and it looks really bland and boring and like it makes it look like you went on to like a dangerous site or something like that. Like I hope that dies. I think like adding creativity to sites, I think is so important. And especially if your app makes a mistake and then it leads somebody astray and then it goes like, oops, page not found, but it's like some creative design. Like it's such a light lift way to make that user experience fun. But if the experience isn't fun, even if the app errors, like I just think developers need to have, or like designers, product managers, I think it just needs to have a little bit more fun where like let's build for a mistake happening. And then if a user gets onto that site, I mean, don't make it feel like they made an error. Just be like, hey, like page not found, but make it kind of funny. You can make like a joke. I've seen like puns happen. There's on GitHub, if you go to a page that's not found, it sort of has this like Mos Eisley Cantina Star Wars theme. And then it has like this little, like if you move the mouse, it'll like kind of a 3D animation around it. And I just think that's funny. Like it's funny. And like, yeah, you're thinking like, where's my site? But then you're like, like that made me laugh. So I feel like a trend that I want to die is not having something like that. Like just really boring, like everything has to work and it has to be really serious. Like I think there is an element to say that you can have fun even when an app has an error or something doesn't work out.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I'm a sucker for like micro interactions and little motion and pairing that with humor. And to your point of, even if there's some kind of error or something goes awry, it does make a difference to have it be more of a pleasant experience and not kind of so dry and drab. So I think that's
totally
great.
Totally.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for your time today. This was awesome getting to chat with you and share a glass of wine, and really good hearing your advice for developers and designers and your background as well. It's really fascinating. So I can't wait to see what other cool content you come out with, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Rebecca. Cheers.